Good morning and welcome to the County of Santa Barbara Planning Commission hearing of November 4th. Would you please all rise for the flag salute? Ready to go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And good morning, Mr. Villalobos. Would you please do our TV coverage announcement and roll call?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to the Commission. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orcutt areas. Rebroadcast of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on CSB TV's website and can be downloaded in a couple of days. Now for the roll call, Commissioner Blau.
Here.
Commissioner Hartman.
Here.
Commissioner Cooney.
Here.
Chair Brown.
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Farini is absent today.
Thank you. And good morning, Ms. Black. If you would please give us our agenda status report and projection report.
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. This morning you have 3 items on your agenda, the first being the Isla Vista Master Plan, then we have a lot line adjustment, and finally the short-term rental ordinance briefing. And just a note, that item will not be heard before 1 o'clock and is indicated on the agenda that way. And we are ready to move forward with all those items. Your next hearing is scheduled for November 19th, which is a special hearing date, Thursday. We're going to start at 1 o'clock, and we have 2 items on that hearing date for your Commission's consideration. We are scheduled to meet on December 2nd, as you can see, and have probably noticed. We've had items come and go. At the moment, there are no items. I don't know if the Commission wants to consider canceling that today, if you want to wait until you get through the next 2 hearings to make sure that there's nothing that needs to be continued to that date. I leave that to the Commission. Our next hearing with items on it is on December 9th, and that is a hearing that would typically be in Santa Maria, but we moved to Santa Barbara, partly because that's the day we're going to have the Commission's holiday lunch with the Montecito Planning Commission. And as you can see, there are several items projected for that date as well. We're putting together, I don't know if David's passed it out yet, the schedule for next year's hearings. As you can see, the first one shows up on your projection report, and that's January 6th. And we have projected the Tahigas Resource and Recovery Project Government Code Conformity determination for your first hearing in January. And then I believe we don't have anything else projected until your last hearing of January 27th for the Granite Gardner Ranch Mining Revision Project. That's all I have so far on the projection report.
And the project that was about the cell site on the peak?
Gibraltar Peak?
Gibraltar Peak. That's disappeared?
No, Madam Chair, it's on December 9th.
On December 9th. Oh, Gibraltar, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now is the time for public comment on any item not on today's agenda. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to speak to any item not on today's agenda, this would be the time to do that. And seeing no one rise here, and I presume we have no one in North County, then we'll close the public comment. Next is Planning Commissioner informational reports, and anything from any planning commissioners? Commissioner Cooney, seeing none. All right. We move on to our Director's Report and Board of Supervisors hearing summary. Good morning, Dr. Russell.
Thank you. Thank you and good morning. I have to report very briefly on yesterday's hearing. That's the only one that's taken place since your last meeting. The first thing was Noel Langle took his package of housing element implementation measures, and that was increasing the bonus density bonus in the coastal zone to be consistent with state law. Being consistent with state law is really the theme of these. Adding the state farm worker housing language into our ordinance, a rarely used procedure which has been on the books for a long time. Changing the definition of family to include certain people living together to be consistent with state law. And then finally, allowing reasonable accommodations more easily for people with disabilities, and that passed and I think it was unanimous, no problems there. There was the E&B natural resources gas pipeline, lots of discussion about safety, but in the end, the board was convinced that things were as safe as they could be, and that was also approved unanimously. And then the last item was our recommendation of denial of the O'Neill residence. And the board voted 4-0 with one abstention to direct us to return with sequel analysis and recommendations for approval. Findings for approval. So that's what we are going to do.
Interesting.
And that was it for yesterday. If you have any questions.
To be clear on O'Neill, the board has full discretion once it comes back with environmental review to take whatever action they choose, but they did ask us to come back with findings for approval.
Interesting. Okay. Any questions for Dr. Russell from the commission? Nope. Seeing none? Well, we're just moving on right quickly here. That's got to be a record. We're going to move on to our standard agenda, and Mr. Villalobos, if you'd please read that into the record.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department that the County Planning Commission consider case numbers 14 GPA 7 and 15 GPA 4, recommending that the Board of Supervisors adopt resolutions amending the Goleta Community Plan to incorporate the IV Master Plan as an appendix to the Goleta Community Plan, and amending the Coastal Land Use Plan to incorporate policies specific to the IV Master Plan, as well as case numbers 15 ORD 5, 10, 11, 9, and 15 RZN 6.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder to anybody in our audience, if you would like to speak to this item, you'll need a speaker slip, which you can get on the back cabinet and give it to Commissioner Blau. And when time is appropriate for public comment, I'll call you up. And anyway, just from the commission for any further ex parte on this item? None? All right, then we welcome. Whoops, did I see a...
I just wanted to mention that I did attend the meeting that Planning and Development had in Isla Vista.
Okay, great, thank you. So, good morning, Mr. Schneider.
Good morning, Madam Chair. We have a brief staff presentation that will respond to the questions that were raised at the last hearing.
Okay.
I'll turn it over to Katie Hendrick, the project manager.
Good morning, Katie.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm here to present information on the Isla Vista Master Plan updates as a follow-up to the September 2nd hearing. The Isla Vista Master Plan project is a focused update with a limited scope intended to address two main issues. The first is addressing Coastal Commission concerns regarding on-street parking capacity and coastal access that arose during Coastal Commission's staff review of the originally adopted plan. And the second is the dissolution of the Redevelopment Agency, or RDA, which was referenced throughout the plan and is no longer applicable. On August 21st, 2007, the Board of Supervisors adopted the Isla Vista Master Plan, or IVMP. The IVMP and county zoning ordinance amendments were then submitted to the Coastal Commission. However, the submittal package was never deemed complete and therefore not considered for certification, in part due to outstanding issues related to on-street parking capacity and potential coastal access impacts associated with the proposed permit parking program. The IVMP focused update before you today is not intended to be a comprehensive reevaluation of the plan adopted by the board in 2007. Instead, the update focuses on a narrow group of amendments and clarifications outlined on this slide. At the September 2nd, 2015 hearing, the County Planning Commission considered the IVMP updates and received testimony from Isla Vista residents requesting more information about the proposed parking monitoring and survey program. The County Planning Commission directed staff to hold a community meeting in Isla Vista to discuss the adequacy of previous survey methodology and the proposed on-street parking strategies prior to returning to the Planning Commission. Prior to the community meeting, Planning and Development staff engaged in the following outreach: posted flyers in downtown Isla Vista, published an article in the Daily Nexus, sent meeting information via our interested parties email list, and posted meeting materials on the Isla Vista Long Range Planning website. And meeting information was sent in both English and Spanish. On October 5th, 2015, Planning and Development staff held a community meeting in Isla Vista to receive public input regarding the on-street parking survey and monitoring program proposed as a part of the IVMP update. Planning and Development staff gave a presentation on the methodology and results of the 2013 on-street parking study and coastal access user surveys conducted by Planning and Development. Public Works, Transportation Division staff were also in attendance at the meeting to answer questions. The meeting was well attended and approximately 25 speakers provided comments. Many of the comments focused on two primary themes. Conditions in Isla Vista have changed since the 2013 on-street parking survey, and disagreement with the 2013 parking survey methodology and results. Public comments at the community meeting covered a number of topics, and a number of those were repeated throughout the meeting. The first was that public safety is of concern, especially when walking to and from parked cars at night. Second, campus parking fees and UCSB housing projects are impacting parking availability in Isla Vista by being too expensive or inaccessible. Third, other projects in IV are charging for on-site parking, pushing residents to park on the street. Residents and students expressed a desire to participate in future planning efforts and encourage the county to work with UCSB and on parking solutions. Future surveys need to account for high parking demand on Friday and Saturday nights, and surveys should be conducted when both UCSB and Santa Barbara City College are in session. As a result of the valuable comments received at the October 5th meeting, IVMP Parking and Transit Action 1.1 has been revised to require the county to hold a community meeting in Isla Vista to discuss and solicit input on parking survey methodology prior to submitting a request for proposal, or RFP, for future parking surveys. The revision also includes a clarification that parking surveys should be conducted when both UCSB and SBCC are in session, and these changes are reflected in Attachment B of your staff memo dated October 27th, 2015. Since the September 2nd Planning Commission hearing, staff identified a need to make a minor revision to the IVMP. The IVMP zoning map on page 4-41 of the plan has been revised to include the Isla Vista incentive area boundary, which was previously omitted from the map as an oversight. This area, shown in the black hatched line, shows the boundary for the Isla Vista Built Right Housing Incentive Program, which is described in Housing Policy 6 within the IVMP. At the September 2nd Planning Commission hearing, the commissioners had some questions about the In-Lieu fee parking program. The In-Lieu fee parking program was established by the Board of Supervisors to provide a mechanism for providing off-site parking within the commercial mixed-use zone district in the plan area. Currently, there is approximately $300,000 in the fund. There are a number of mechanisms to potentially reduce parking demand. These include car share programs, leased off-site parking spaces at UCSB, an automobile covenant restriction, and conjunctive use of nearby parking facilities. While the county does not have an active project to utilize in-lieu funds, staff continues to monitor for opportunities, including development of parking in conjunction with the county-owned parcels or spaces for car or bike share programs. Since the Planning Commission hearing on September 2nd, Assembly Bill 3, or AB 3, was signed by the governor. AB 3, sponsored by Assemblymember Doss Williams, would create a special legislative community services district, or CSD, for Isla Vista. This bill was signed by Governor Brown on October 8th. Residents will be able to vote on this item on the November 2016 ballot, and if passed, the CSD will have certain governing powers, including those of a parking district. Recommendations made by the Planning Commission today will be forwarded to the Board of Supervisors for their consideration at an adoption hearing in winter 2016. Once the Board of Supervisors adopts the updates to the IVMP, staff will resubmit the IVMP, associated local coastal program amendments, and all other documents submitted with the original 2007 Coastal Commission submission for certification. Staff will submit the IVMP to the Coastal Commission in spring 2016. Staff recommends the Planning Commission take the recommended actions in Section 2 of the August 25th, 2015 staff report. Staff also recommends that the Planning Commission consider a revision to IVMP Parking and Transit Action 1.1, discussed in the October 27th, 2015 staff memo, requiring the county to hold a community meeting in Isla Vista to discuss and solicit input on parking survey methodology prior to submitting an RFP for future parking surveys. The revision also includes a clarification that parking surveys should be conducted when both UCSB and SBCC are in session. Staff also recommends the Planning Commission consider amending the Isla Vista Master Plan zoning map on page 4-41 of the IVMP to include the Isla Vista incentive area boundary, which was previously omitted from the map.
Okay, questions by commissioners? Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, I kind of question why we would need to hire a parking consultant to go out there and tell us that we have a parking problem. I mean, you've had plenty of testimony from people that we know there's a problem. I think what we need to do is look for solutions. Do you think we can hire a parking consultant that can help us find a solution to the problem, as opposed to going back out there and determining that we have one? I just don't see the benefit. What's the parking consultant going to tell us at the end of the survey that we don't already know today?
Commissioner Blau, through the chair. The purpose of the parking survey, we agree, we understand there's obviously an issue out there. It's to monitor the vacancy rate, with 15% vacancy being the sort of tipping point. And so based on the current data we have available, we're below that threshold. There certainly will be a need, once we cross that, to develop a more robust parking program or some other alternative. It could be increased mass transit. It could be increasing active transit. I mean, there's a number of different ways that could happen. But the thought right now is to continue to monitor and the vacancy rate, with that being the key determinant.
Mr. Schneider, I think as we discussed at the last meeting, there's a lot of changes that have occurred since this document was produced in 2013. And certainly one of the ones that is going to have a great impact, as Ms. Heinrich indicated, was the Community Services District. Should that be approved, then they take over the parking responsibilities, or how, can you explain that a little more fully?
So as Ms. Hendrick indicated, AB3 was approved, so it will be on the November 2016 ballot. Obviously, we can't predict the outcome of that election, but assuming it was put in place, among the tools that would be available to a CSD would be that of taking on the role and responsibility of a parking district. And my understanding is that would need to be established by the CSD. It's not automatic that they would just assume that role. Those roles and responsibilities would have to be defined in its creation.
Okay. Does that information need to be in some way incorporated into the information going to the Coastal Commission, so they'd understand the county's roles and some other things, since there've been changes and there may be more changes, and that may or may not, I don't know, affect how they consider this document.
Madam Chair, the Coastal Commission, like the board, will receive all of the materials that have been provided to you and to the Board of Supervisors. So we are briefing both the commission and the
So they'll
board on
know.
it. So they'll know.
So they'll be aware.
They'll know as much as we know right now. I mean,
Okay.
the real issue is we don't know what's going to
No, I
happen
know. I understand that.
next, but there are some avenues to perhaps address this issue in a different way.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioner? No, Commissioner Cooney.
Just one quick question, Ms. Hendrick, regarding the timeframe. You indicated the matter will be submitted to the Board of Supervisors winter 2016. You mean like January, February, something in that frame of the beginning of the year rather than a year away?
Commissioner Cooney, through the chair, yes.
And then the next submittal is in the spring to the Coastal Commission. That's anticipated to follow the Board of Supervisors action. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cooney, just to clarify too, the normal submittal package to the Coastal Commission, we usually strive to make that within 30 days of adoption from the board. It's a rather lengthy application, but that's our goal we always strive for.
And the Coastal Commission will take, what, 2 or 3 weeks to adopt?
Commissioner Hartman.
Just following on that line, so the Coastal Commission is primarily concerned about beach access, and they're going to be looking at whether there's parking enough so that the public has access to the beach. And one of the comments at the IV meeting was that the big swells in October, November really bring increased surfing traffic, at least to the beach. And a suggestion was that for the methodology in the future, that we look very carefully at those times. As I understand it, we can't do anything about the methodology that was developed in the past, but what we're trying to do is frame it up for the future so that when the next survey is done, it takes into account some of the factors that the community raised. So I think that October-November timeframe is an important one to be out there and seeing how adequately coastal access is being dealt with. We also had a submission, a letter just today from Ms. Bartz, and at some point I'd like staff to respond to that because, again, she's raising a lot of questions that are likely to go to the Coastal Commission about coastal access, and I just think it's important that we be ready to answer those. That can be later in if you want to. We can hear public testimony and then
we'll come back
respond to that
afterwards.
later.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now is the time for public comment, and if anybody has just walked in and wishes to make a public comment, I don't have their speaker slip, if you'd give that to Commissioner Blau. Otherwise, we will start with Ms. Suter, to be followed by Jonathan Aboud.
Thank you, Commissioners, for this opportunity. Pegeen Sutar, 33-year resident of Isla Vista. I've been here a long time. I'd first like to thank the Department and the Commission for coming out to Isla Vista and doing that public meeting. That was extremely helpful, and a lot of information was given to us. We were able to respond in a way that we had some factual evidence to work with and stuff. And thank you again for continuing this conversation. That's a great report. That reflects very nicely what was said at the meeting. I am a little concerned. A parking program is needed now. And you're talking about forwarding this to the Board of Supervisors within a few months. So my question is this: are we going to have an opportunity for someone else to come out and recount the spaces? Because everything seems to depend upon this trigger. And I'm pretty darn sure we have reached that trigger, you guys. And if that is what has happened, then the parking permit program is necessary now. It needs to be instituted now before this moves forward to the supervisors, before this moves forward to the Coastal Commission. I mean, if what the issue is beach access, what little beach access exists right now is quietly disappearing with the university's surrounding growth, with the property owners charging for on-site parking, pushing more residents onto the street. Former family households are now turning into the more densely student-populated households, particularly in that area where there is parking for the beach right now. One of the things that really concerns me inside of the master plan is, it's on page, I need my glasses, 4-55. It's the build-out strategy. Build-out of the Isla Vista master plan would result in additional 1,063 housing units in the residential portion of Isla Vista and 1,447 housing units community-wide. That's additional. And you break down the numbers in Isla Vista, and you have 3.1 people living in each unit. You put this amount of housing in Isla Vista, and you increase Isla Vista by 4,467 people. That's a 30% increase of our community. So it's not going to work, folks. There is not the parking now for the existing people that live there. And you're talking about increasing our community by 30%. We're talking safety issues. We're talking infrastructure issues. This is a piece of something that needs to be revisited. Parking is the first step. So as someone who helped with the parking count, it's not accurate, all right? They say I have 98 spaces on my block. I have 88 spaces on my block. They say there's never more than 60 cars on my block. It is rare that in the morning I find more than 5 spaces open when I get up and walk my dog. So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate you folks giving us an opportunity to continue to discuss this.
Commissioner
Thanks.
Hartman, I think has a question for you.
It's not so much a question, but just a comment for the chair. As the Planning Commission, our jurisdiction, as we said last time, is rather narrowly circumscribed.
Yeah, I
but the
understand
board
that.
has tremendous discretion. And so my thought is that perhaps we could have staff be writing down some of these key issues that are being raised in public testimony that are beyond our pay scale and jurisdiction, but to make sure that it's captured so that when the presentation is made to the board, they have these and they can begin thinking about it, and that we don't lose it or your time isn't wasted today.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Aboud, followed by Sue Wisenand.
Hello, Planning Commission members. My name is Jonathan Aboud. I'm a temporarily displaced Isla Vista resident. I live in IV normally, but I didn't have a place for this month. So I'm living in Hope Ranch right now. I'm a trustee for Santa Barbara City College. I've lived in IV for 6 years. This is my 6th year. I know the parking issue is a disaster, and I think it needs to be rectified, and we need a program to fix it. But I also understand that we aren't exactly, it's not realistic to create one between now and May or now and April and have it go through the motions of government. Government's not very fast to get a parking program done between now and May and pass to the Coastal Commission. That's why I personally would support moving the plan forward now, but with the caveat that we should have an area planning commission in Isla Vista in the future to oversee the implementation of the plan to make it more community reflective and community based. And also I would support that the Isla Vista Community Services District implement a community-run and community-designed parking plan, because that's the most localized form of government we'd be able to have to design and implement the best possible plan that's in our hands. So that's what I would support. I'm not the biggest fan of the plan. I don't think anyone is, but it's the plan that everyone came to agreement with. So we can't really change the plan without another 5-year process or extensive process. I don't think anybody wants to go through that right now, maybe in the future, but it's a little bit too much to do right now. So again, I know the parking is a catastrophe in Isla Vista, but the realistic approach is handling it through a community services district, and let's put all our effort. You know, we'd love all your support in getting that passed and having an area planning commission in Isla Vista. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wisenand, followed by Janet Stitch.
Thank you. I'm Sue Wisenand. I'm a long-term resident, and I spoke at the meeting that was held in the community. I appreciate all the work that you've all done to look at the problem that we have in IV. The parking situation is, as Jonathan said, disastrous. There is no place to park, and something needs to be done now. I don't think waiting is the right answer. I don't know quite how it could be done, but as soon as possible, something does need to be done. Beach access is a real problem. As Ms. Bartz put in her letter, Community Mallorca right now is probably the only place where people who don't live in Isla Vista can come and get to the beach. The other areas are taken up by residents, so there's just no real access. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Stitch, followed by Mr. or Ms. Freeman. Sorry, I can't read the first name.
Hi, I was wondering if we could get the map up on the, thank you so much. My name's Janet Stitch. I live in Isla Vista. I have for about 15 years now. I was on the project area committee for the IV master plan. I attended probably every meeting but two. And I would like to talk about the increased zoning here, how you have the hash marks around. We all know that this is an 8-year-old plan, and usually we have plans that go 10 years in the future, and then we have another 10-year plan. So this is becoming problematic for us because it's not a 10-year plan, it's the master plan. And just like we needed to revise some things with the parking, we need to revise some things with the density that is requested to be built out within the hash marks there. Because in the interim, UCSB is putting up 2 more towers at the old Francisco Torres site. They are also have built more student housing on the outskirts of Isla Vista. The density has already increased quite a bit since this proposed zoning was proposed. So I would ask, since we have until spring of 2016 and we have a little time before the supervisors meeting to revisit that and maybe make suggestions to downzone some of that proposed extra building, because right now Isla Vista is on the edge, and we've made some really good strides in Isla Vista with the help of you and with the help of the Board of Supervisors, and we would all just like to see it continue to move in the right direction and have good, strong planning. So that would be my request, is that we take some time out to look at that as well. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Freeman, thank you. Followed by Ash Khan, and I apologize for not being able to pronounce the last name. Thank you.
My name's Jay Freeman.
Jay, thank you. I get that. Thanks.
My handwriting in some days is much worse than other days.
That's okay.
I mostly just want to comment on Daniel's Blau's comment that he made, which is, why do we need a study in order to tell us something that we clearly already know? This is something where when you look at the master plan document and the mechanism of having the surveys that are done semi-annually in order to try to determine how much parking is available, and then at some point it ends up kicking in and causing a parking permit program that gets allocated. We just don't have any parking in Isla Vista. I mean, it's something where I was kind of under the impression that at the meeting that we had in Isla Vista, it had become very clear from all the residents' comments the specific kinds of issues that had occurred in the 2013 survey, why we felt that the 2013 survey would have come to the conclusion that it might have done. We had members of the community, some of whom were here today, who went back through and looked at the capacity numbers, and the capacity numbers were off. We just don't have parking. And so if the idea is that we want to have a parking permit program, if the number goes below this 15% threshold, I feel like it's something where you could just kind of like come to IV on a day. Some of the people in the residents that here can probably just give you a day. They coming fairly soon, and that you just like drive through, try to park and visit us. And when you give up, then maybe we can start talking about getting a parking permit program today. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Ash Khan to be followed by Alexander Bates.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashkan Manufar, and I know a lot of vowels, so it's really hard to say the last name.
Thank you.
So I'm a student at UCSB, resident for 3 years. member of Associated Students. So I'm here to support the staff recommendation to update the plan in order for it to pass to the Coastal Commission. I think that is very important that also that Isla Vista Area Planning Commission be considered for Isla Vista, because the parking issue is very unique and the nature of parking is also very different than other parts of the county. Like for one example, the 72-hour parking limit on the street, even though that makes a lot of sense in other areas in Isla Vista, oftentimes people use their car once a week, but for very specific reasons. For example, to get vital groceries that are affordable outside of Isla Vista, but not necessarily in Isla Vista, or work that they go to that they can't get jobs nearby. So oftentimes it's dismissed that students need cars, but oftentimes it's very, very vital that they have them. So adequate parking really needs to be considered. The landlord's use of high parking fees for their parking spots is an issue. So the more local, the better. So an area commission in Isla Vista is highly needed, as well as a parking program underneath the CSD, so that as much local influence and local perspective can be used to make a sufficient and effective parking program. So thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Alexander Bates, followed by Bob Sumner.
Hey, y'all. See if I can get that right there. So I'd like to support. My name is Sasha Bates. Alexander is my legal name. I'm a member of Associated Students. I live in Isla Vista. We'll be continuing living in Isla Vista. So I'd like to support passing the staff recommendation so we can pass this through the Coastal Commission. I'd like to reiterate what Jonathan said about not being able to get this parking plan done quickly. So if that's not true, if we can't have that, then I think the most important thing is to be able to delegate to a local body who actually understands the situation on an intimate level. And that's something that we can do through the community service district, so we can actually get a parking plan that can work long-term, because that's the way that we would be able to establish effective long-term change, is through the people who are actually on the ground or parking their car.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sumner, to be followed by Thomas Dixon.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for
Good
having
morning.
us. I'll be very brief. My name is Bob Sumner. I'm a resident of Isla Vista. With the help of a couple of residents, including Pegeen, we counted every available parking space in Isla Vista. We found that the problem with this parking survey is that it grossly and randomly overestimated the capacity of many, many streets in Isla Vista. I'll be happy to provide the numbers for you, but I specifically found that in the east area, the count was 16.8% over. In the central area, it was 6.6% over. And in the west area, it was 13.6% over, for a total of 9.75% overcounting, a very objective counting. I'm done. Anybody have a question, or would you like the numbers provided? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dixon, to be followed by our last speaker, Gabriel Pragan. And if there's anybody else who'd like to speak, if you get a speaker slip up to Commissioner Blau, please.
Hi, I'm Thomas Dixon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Actually, most of my neighbors have already addressed the issues here, and it's the same thing for all of us, I think, that there's just not enough parking for the number of people, the number of cars that are coming into the neighborhood or living in the neighborhood now. And the traffic, the parking study that's been turned in is in conflict with the findings of individual residents who've gone out and just counted spots by hand, and it's just, there's not that many. Really, that's all I have to say about it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Gabriel, and he'll be our last speaker.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
So I've got a couple of things, and I'll keep it brief and to the point. So there's a typo in the master plan. if you go to Parking and Transit Action 1.1, there's an inconsistency between point 1 and point 2. So you're saying that there's going to be annual surveys conducted while UCSB is in session, and they will move up to semi-annual surveys once a 15% threshold is crossed. But then in point 2, it cites 3 consecutive UCSB quarters surveyed. So does that mean we'll be surveying consecutive quarters? Is that going to be like a quarterly survey then? Or, I mean, that was kind of like the question that I had. Would it be semi-annual surveys, 3 consecutive semi-annual surveys? Or,
Okay.
so
We'll get staff to answer that question.
cool. Moving right along, several points. So I like to think of the Goleta Master Plan just because it's an example of one that exists close to us, and it's been implemented, and it's existed for the past 20 years. And so this one, we would expect to exist for the same amount of time, right? It's kind of old isn't the word that I would use. Outdated on the issues, as like people have brought up. So extending it another 20 years would kind of, deteriorate its action. It doesn't seem applicable, especially when considering that you're calling it a master plan. I'm not sure why. Because Goleta's is a community plan. Why isn't this a community plan? Why is this a master plan? Who's the master of the community?
Unanswerable questions.
Yeah, so last point, I just wanted to reiterate that it would be really, really nice to keep the community in the loop. These meetings with the community regarding parking survey methodology are a start, but honestly, I think it's kind of stupid because the survey should be conducted in a correct way. The surveying company should, entity should know what they're doing if they're professional and conducting it well. So that's just, we shouldn't really have to, oversee the methods of the survey. But keeping us in the loop overall would be super nice.
Okay,
Cool.
thank you.
Hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you. I see Mr. Smart is from Public Works, and perhaps he would like to make some comment on any of what he's heard or
Thank
what we
you.
have before us. Thank you.
Commissioners. I do have a couple comments I would like to make. One is the count out there that was done in previous years. Isla Vista is constantly changing. It's just a snapshot. Right now, the parking could be a lot worse than it was before. The number of parking stalls are different than it was before. We've gone out and eliminated a lot of the red curb that was unnecessary, trying to create more parking out there. And I would agree with the public and say the study needs to be updated as far as the number of spots that are in there. It needs to be started from scratch when we do address the survey. Also, I'd like to state that the plan is that the Coastal Commission we're going forward is just a minimum. It doesn't mean we can't do more as a county, count more or something like that. It's just going to be we're going to do at least this much to make sure that the parking is going to be monitored out there. And once it gets approved and everything, we can move forward with a community outreach, figuring out what would be the best way to approach it. And it is a standard approach to go out. We're hearing there's a problem, go out and do our surveys, understand the problem, see how bad it is, and to address it that way. It's going to be a controversial program. Nobody's going to be excited about paying high fees to get a parking spot. Not all the residents out there will probably get a parking spot that live out there, especially along the Del Playa section where the demand for parking is higher than the spaces out there. If you go out there at any time, it's very difficult to find a parking on the east end of Del Playa. And I guess that's all I had to say.
Commissioner Blau has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, any doubt in your mind that we're not well below the 15%?
Well, I know in certain areas of Isla Vista, like I said, in the Del Playa area on the east end, some of the areas, it is below the 15% availability. It's near 100% taken up during most of the times of the day. I go out there, I can't find a parking spot that end. But if you go more to the west and the center part, there's a lot of parking available. So when you look at Isla Vista as a whole, The problem may or may not be the 15%, but if we look at it through sections, and that was one of the comments the public made, is we should be looking at sections and seeing if we should implement a program that way.
And the reason I asked the question is what we're asking, what we're recommending the board do is spend money in hiring a consultant to go out and do the parking survey. I can't figure out any benefit for doing that. I can figure out a benefit for hiring some consultant to tell us how to solve the problem, but not to go out and make the counts. Would you agree with me?
I understand your comment, and I think it's a valid comment. But the parking situation in Isla Vista, I mean, we did a study our study count was done by the consultant in 2007 and then 2012. The parking demand decreased during that time, probably because of the economy, could have been other factors. Right now, we have a lot of construction going on where the old Francisco Torres parking lot's been taken out. A lot of that parking's gone into Isla Vista. They're building a parking lot up there. Whether those cars return to the university parking lots or not remains to be seen. If there's other factors we can approach, like Matt mentioned, that can improve the parking and increase parking spaces, lower the demand out there. So it's a very complicated and it's going to be a very controversial subject as we approach, and it needs public input, and I would say that we need to study it further and to understand exactly what the problem is and where it is. The studies before, I would agree that they need to be redone.
And Gary, when do you think the next study might occur, or the next survey?
I would defer that question to the planning department.
Mr. Schneider.
In terms of timing, that would be programmed after Coastal Commission certification.
Because the last survey was done in
2013.
Okay, Mr. Smart just said 2012, so if it's, okay, 20, all right. Anyway, well, it's still many changes, I think, have occurred, and I think the community would welcome one sooner than later, but that's a good response. Thank you. All right, anything else, Mr. Smart?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was 2013. I
Okay.
misspoke on that. It was May
Okay.
of 2013,
Okay.
not of
Great.
2012.
All right, thank you. All right, Commissioner Hartman, anything else? I think we have no other public speaker slips, so I will close the public hearing and
Staff may want to
respond
to
anything?
a few of the questions we heard, and then I have some more questions.
So in general, based on some of the comments we heard, we heard several commenters asking for implementing a parking program now. We also heard comments along the lines of taking a revisit on issues such as density. I just want to be really clear that as far as a work program item and the resources we have available and dedicated to this project, it's limited in scope. So any sort of expansion where we need to broaden that, that would need board direction and board resources to support that. Any changes too could also trigger the need for additional environmental impact review. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. There was a question about the timing of the surveys. So the way the monitoring program is currently set up, it would be on an annual basis. And if we hit the 15% trigger, we would switch to twice a year. And in the case where there were 3 consecutive at 15%, because we're looking at trends, as Mr. Smart had indicated, that's when the parking program or some other alternative would be implemented.
Commissioner Hartman.
If I might just follow up, then that was in response to the public comment about a possible inconsistency, and you're explaining that and saying the language as it exists is okay, that we would be doing annual surveys. If we got something that showed us we're over the mark, then we have to do them more often.
That is correct.
So I appreciate the complexity and difficulty of implementing the program that Mr. Smart envisioned, but it seems as though with surveys and then upon surveys that it would be a much longer delay in sort of implementing any program. Just when within Isla Vista, as has been explained, there are some areas that are under and some that are over. So just what is the exact trigger? What has to happen before a parking program is developed and implemented?
As it's currently framed in the documents before you, it would be 3 consecutive surveys of 15%, below the 15% vacancy rate would trigger the parking permit program, or an alternative. There's an existing ordinance that already lays out the framework. I believe it was adopted in 2007, that would use as the baseline to create that. Obviously, we already discussed the potential implementation of a community service district, so that could change circumstances as well. So,
lots of balls in the air. Commissioner Cooney.
Thanks, Madam Chair. As I listened to the testimony of the public and staff's follow-up, it seems to me one of the issues that's not incorporated in the documents before us is the fact that parking is more dense in certain areas of Isla Vista than it is in others, and yet our surveys and the process for surveys takes the area as a whole, and that is the trigger. Seems to me one of the possible outcomes of the review should be, well, maybe we ought to section off a portion of currently densely parked areas of Isla Vista and maybe have a specific area parking plan. So if you park within those areas, there may be limited parking, no overnight parking, there might be other measures taken. You could, obviously that would impact other areas where it isn't restricted. But if we look even at downtown parking in Santa Barbara, you have certain areas where there's limited hour parking, and as you go out, as some employees of downtown businesses always have, you can get unlimited parking. So it doesn't seem like the survey is driving us toward that kind of area by area analysis. It's more look at Isla Vista as a whole. And, as one of the speakers said, it's a start, but I'm not sure that that we're really going to aim at the center of the target as opposed to just trying to hit the target anywhere else.
Commissioner Blau, then Commissioner Hartman.
Yeah. Well, as I said before, for me, the survey is just pushing the can down the road a year or two and doesn't do anything to solve the problem. I don't need a survey to tell me there's a problem. I've listened to 25 or 50 people tell me there's a problem. They all live there. I haven't heard anybody from the public say we didn't have a problem. I will say that I'm a little concerned about waiting on the CSD to solve the problem. It's our experience that CSDs sometimes cause as many problems as they try and solve. The only good thing about them, to tell you the truth, is understand this. They will have the ability to raise your property taxes to help solve the problem. And I'm not sure that's actually what you want to do. I'm not sure that, although that may be the only solution, for me, I think a better solution is I think we need to come back and look at the policies we had put in before. And I was not in favor of some of the policies on the parking issues when we developed this plan, and I'm still not in favor of them, and I think they need to be looked at again. I know we allowed some projects to go forward with less than one parking space per dwelling unit. I objected to that then, I object to it now. I will also tell you that if you tell me we have $300,000 in lieu fees have been paid, why are we not spending that $300,000 to try and improve the parking situation? I mean, it doesn't mean that we have to actually go build a parking structure with those funds. If we can, find 15 more parking spaces and it costs us that might be a good program. And maybe we take part of the $300,000 to get the board to allocate for some county employee resources to start a method to help solve the problem. To me, the idea of hiring a traffic consultant, redoing the count, and doing it every year or twice a year to tell us when we have a problem, I don't need that. I know there's a problem, and I know we need to solve the problem. So let's figure out some methods and some ideas that will solve the problem starting next week, not 3 years from now or 4 years from now. So that's my position, and so do what you want to do.
All right, Commissioner Hartman.
I was very swayed by Mr. Jonathan Aboud's remarks. That is, an awful lot of effort has gone into developing the plan to this point. Unfortunately, the conditions on the ground are changing faster than the bureaucratic regulatory scheme is able to accommodate them. As I understand it, and this is kind of a question to staff here, the parking survey is to, if it goes over the trigger, then that would trigger a parking permit program. That's the remedy, right? That's the primary remedy. Am I correct in that assumption?
That is correct. There is the caveat that some other unknown alternative could be discovered at the time. Obviously, things are fluid. Like I had alluded to, it could be a mass transit solution, something along those lines. But the prescribed cure, so to speak, is a parking permit program.
So a thought is to allow that to try to catch up and get the plan through the process. But are there other avenues that we could be pursuing to deal with the parking issues while that occurs that aren't necessarily a parking permit system? I know the RDA was a source of funding, and now we have this other fee. One thing that I heard people say was very much needed was perhaps off-site storage for cars. Another thing I've heard at the meeting, I believe, was that UCSB faculty and staff don't have very much parking at the university, and so they're spilling over to IV. And maybe there are other things in addition to the parking permit program that we can be working on. Again, I'm struck by the October, November, and the surf demand. And is there a shuttle for that time, or are there other things we can be doing right away to deal with the program while we allow the plan to get through, flagging in addition to the Board of, as I suggested earlier, some of these density issues that people have flagged, and tell the board maybe they want to think about this or figure out how to address that. So that's my thinking. I hope I've made that clear.
As a follow-on question, what is the nexus needed to be able to use some of that money to do some of the things that Commissioner Hartman just suggested?
It's currently, I believe there's 7 criteria in which it can be applied to. I think we have a slide that highlights them. We'll pull it up. I can say while Katie's pulling it up, that wasn't the exact one, but it is limited in that it's to directly create new parking spaces. It could be used for increased enforcement, and it could be used to things to reduce demand, which are highlighted here, like a car share program, leasing off-space sites, things along those lines. I do not believe we could use it for actual planning work in itself.
So any planning would have to be separate.
It would be separate, and then that could be sort of capital money to implement what came out of that.
Okay, Ms. Black.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, an option would be for you to, when you forward your recommendation to the board, to highlight this as an issue that you think needs additional work in the very near future. And we could certainly try and scope something, an implementation item or a pre-implementation item in the work program for the coming fiscal year. And that would be a way to get some funds set aside for this. I think it's it's a very complicated issue. The Public Works Department, I can't remember what year it was, sometime before 2000, and maybe it was 2007, attempted to develop a permit parking program. It was highly unpopular in the community. It was rejected by the Coastal Commission mainly because of its effects on coastal access parking. So we tried that, and it did not succeed, mostly because of coastal parking. I think having a program developed sort of at a grassroots level through the CSD or some other agency that might be formed as a result of the recent legislation is probably going to be more successful, but it's not the be-all, end-all solution to parking in Isla Vista because it doesn't create spaces. It makes spaces available for some residents of Isla Vista that might be used in a way that we don't want them used today, for people storing cars in ways that, in areas that would better be used for real parking, for keeping some of the UCSB parking out of Isla Vista. But it doesn't, it's not going to create a bunch of spaces. It's just going to allocate them a little bit differently, and it's expensive. So we're kind of stuck with what's the best way to approach this issue, and it has changed drastically over time. It's gone up and down, and right now we're in a situation where there's a lot of activity happening at UCSB. It hasn't quite settled down yet. We're not quite sure what it's going to look like at the end. So
that's where we are.
That's kind of where we're at.
If I may?
Go ahead.
I'm trying to understand exactly what you're suggesting to us, and would that be then that the master plan and the parking permit program would go forward and we would concurrently try to get a work plan item to address other strategies for reducing parking?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Hartman, what I was suggesting is that you forward a recommendation on the master plan, and then separately ask the Board of Supervisors to prioritize a work program item to further address parking issues. So not tying the parking permit program to the certification.
And that should be done as part of what we do today.
It certainly could be. I mean, you might as well let the board know
yeah.
that this is a concern and that it's something that you would expect to forward to them in the spring.
Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, so the parking permit program is going to be a fee that you pay for a parking permit. Was that that kind of the plan?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Blau, yes. I mean, somebody has to pay for it.
And
It's
so
not-
what happens to the funds that are generated by the parking permits?
They're used to administer the program, to administer and enforce the program. So when you do a parking permit program, you charge for the permit. You have to determine how you're going to allocate those permits.
Mm-hmm.
You charge for the permits. Somebody has to administer that, get the permits out there to people. And in Isla Vista, that's a bit more complicated because the turnover is quite rapid. And then they have to do enforcement. So it's to pay for all that, administration and enforcement.
Okay, and we wouldn't be using the money to buy additional parking lots in the future, huh? It would be
There
just...
wouldn't be additional money unless we charged quite a high fee.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I could see why they wouldn't like that. They're spending money in order to have someone give them a ticket if they're not parked with a permit. It doesn't make a lot of sense to
That's
me.
what
But I'm not getting much bang for my buck, so, okay, thanks.
Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just responding to a couple of comments, and I think, this is kind of turning into a workshop, which isn't bad because we all recognize there's a problem, and any way that we can pass along our concerns to the board is beneficial, separate or not. But it doesn't appear to me that we have a short-term way of solving the parking problem. It's been there, I can attest, for the mid-'60s in terms of personal experience when parking in Isla Vista was a severe problem. If you go out there and look at the number of cars parked in driveways and on lawns and elsewhere, you realize that there are more cars than the community can absorb. And in other universities, in other communities, restrictions are placed on students who can't bring their cars until they reach a certain position in the university. And these kinds of extraordinary measures, I think, have to be looked at as well. But I didn't see that turning this over to a community service district, or even if we imagined a separate government for Isla Vista adopting a restrictive parking program, if the Coastal Commission has jurisdiction to overrule that and say, you know, Isla Vista can build lots till the cows come home, but as long as people can't get out there to surf, we're not going to approve the plan. Am I wrong about that?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Cooney, it's certainly an issue that needs to be addressed in the plan. The last permit parking program we discussed with the Coastal Commission was a nighttime only, and even there, they were concerned that we have coastal access spaces available, even for people to go to the beach in the middle of the night. So it's certainly an issue that needs to be addressed. I don't think it precludes development of a program. It makes it more difficult.
Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, and I think that answers Ruth Bartz's question on her letter to us this morning. That was my concern too. We can't stop nighttime parking to the beach because I think you have to have access to the beach at night. So it doesn't really help.
Okay, staff, any further comments? None? Based on our, okay. So Commissioner Hartman, would you like to take this and make a recommendation?
I had a comment to Commissioner Cooney's point, and then I'm prepared to preface a motion and then make a motion. One thing that I heard at the community meeting, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the allegation was that there are many parking spaces at UCSB, but they're parking lots that are often empty because it's very expensive. So there is, at least according to that allegation, capacity, unused capacity, and the question is how to work incentives so that could be used to relieve the problem, if indeed that's true. So I just wanted to put that on the record, that was a comment I heard several times. I am very much in favor of what Ms. Black has suggested. I think huge effort has gone into this plan, and I think if we take another 5 years, conditions on the ground will still overwhelm us. So I think it's important that we move through with this plan. I'm personally not sure that we are adequately dealing with the coastal access parking that the Coastal Commission is concerned about, and I hope that staff is confident that we are. So I'm prepared to move staff's recommendation, but separately I would like to endorse a recommendation to the board that we have a work item that looks at other ways of dealing with this problem, and particularly the county and community working with the university and seeing if there is capacity and how that could be addressed, and if they're creating additional demand for spaces in Isla Vista by failing to provide for their own workers.
Great, perfect, thank you. I'll go ahead and second that. Any further comment, Commissioner?
Yeah, I'm not going to support that only because the part of the staff's recommendation is the hiring a consultant to go out and do these traffic counts. I don't need that. I think that's a complete waste of money and a complete waste of time. If it's, I don't need the consultant to tell me that we've got the 15% threshold, and I don't even care if it is 15%. That doesn't solve the problem that we've heard of over the last two hearings. I mean, we have had almost every speaker come up and told us that there is no parking where there's a parking problem. I don't need a consultant to go out there and count the cars and count the spaces to come back and tell me that we're at a different threshold. And I certainly don't want a program that talks about if we exceed 15% for 2 years or 2 trials, and then we're going to have, and we've now heard that the parking permit probably doesn't work. Nobody wants that. It's going to be very controversial. So we need to find some other solution. So let's just get the board to authorize the staff time to find the solution. And it may be not a solution, but we can certainly get it better than it is today. And even if we only accomplish that, we've accomplished something. So I would hope you would change your motion to take that part out. If you will, I will support it. If you don't, I'm going to say no, and you'll now know why. I mean, I like the rest of the plan. I want to do everything else you want to do, but on that one issue, no, I just can't see wasting the money or the time.
Ms. Black.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, I just wanted you to understand some conversations that we've had with Coastal Commission staff, because clearly this has been an issue that's been ongoing with them, and this was a way for them to feel like we were committed to addressing the problem. And Commissioner Blau, I guess my suggestion would be we work on those other solutions, but we're going to need to be able to show the commission whether or not we've made progress, and those counts would be helpful in being able to show that. So that's kind of the part of the reason that action is in there. They wanted to have an enforceable trigger to take really concrete steps like a permit parking program. But if we can make improvements in the meantime, those improvements will show up in the counts. So,
can I respond to that? Just respond to that. I still say no. I'm not going to spend money to try and fool the Coastal Commission that we're solving the problem. Now, you can count it any way you want to. I think it just as good. It does just as good, I think, to tell the Coastal Commission the board is authorizing funds to do a work program to solve the problem. That we can't, doing the traffic count doesn't solve the problem. Okay, yeah, we're doing something, but we're doing nothing to solve the problem. So, I'd rather tell the Coastal Commission we're going to spend money to solve the problem, not that we're going to spend money to see if we have a problem. So it doesn't change my position, although I appreciate what you're saying, but it just doesn't help me.
Just, Madam Chair, just to clarify, I didn't say we were trying to fool the Coastal Commission. That is not what I said. So,
Commissioner Blatt, what I'd like to do is show when we take the vote is that you do support part of the motion that there be a work item that looks at other ways to address parking impacts. And I'd like to perhaps do a two-part, if I could. I'm not sure if I can do that, so that we can show that there is full Planning Commission support for putting this as a work item, and to
if you want to bifurcate the motion
I
to
would
where
like
the
to do that.
where the consultant hiring for the county is
Right.
one motion, the rest is
Right.
another motion, that'd make me real happy.
Okay.
I'd love to do that.
Okay, Commissioner Hartman.
And I believe that was my motion, was to follow staff's recommendation, but more to Commissioner Blau's point. The survey, as I understand it, is to monitor changes in the parking situation. It may be that we already have a very strong sense that there's not enough parking, that it's already met the trigger, since that survey was done in 13. But I think we need ongoing surveys to see if there's change. It's merely a monitoring program, and if we have other strategies to deal with parking, then we would like to see those changes on the ground. Also, I think that the community was very effective in showing that the way the baseline parking spaces were measured in the survey was not adequate, and they did some really good work. So I think we've learned a lot in this process, and it's merely information, it's merely monitoring, it's merely a way of measuring change. So I'm not against the survey at all, and I would want to keep that as part of the plan. So my motion is first to move staff's recommendation.
Okay, and I'll second that, and let's do a vote on that, if you do a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Blau?
No.
Commissioner Hartman?
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
And Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-1.
Then I'd like to make a second motion that the Planning Commission recommend that the board find other ways to address the parking shortages in Isla Vista and incorporate that into its work plan.
And I'll second that.
Okay, great. And roll call, please.
Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
Commissioner Hartman.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney.
Aye.
And Commissioner Brown.
Okay. Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Commissioner Hartman. you
See,
have-
then there was the other issue of matters that are outside of parking, and we promised that, and mainly it has to do with density, and that we would bring, staff would bring that to the board, the comments that the public made that are, just so that they're alert to that, but that's not really something within our purview.
Okay. Great. All right. Thank you, and thank you for the community for showing up. We appreciate your coming and your comments. Okay, so we'll move on then to agenda item number 2.
Madam Chair, could we just take a few
Yes,
minute break?
let's
Because
take
I
a-
think we're going to be done quite early.
Okay,
and-
fine. Let's just take a 10-minute break, and I don't think they're here for 2 anyway. Yeah, it was good. Hey, Mr. Villalobos, we're back on the record. If you would please read item number 2 into the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Ms. Laurel Perez and Heidi Jones of SEPS agents for Bolt House Properties to consider case number 15 LLA2 and to determine the project is exempt from the provisions of CEQA pursuant to state CEQA guidelines section 15305A.
Great, thank you. Any ex parte site visit? Seeing none. We'll move on to our planner, Ms. Trotter-Cadena. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. The project before you is for a lot line adjustment located approximately 3 miles south of Highway 166 at the intersection of Bell and Foothill Roads in the Cuyama Area 1st Supervisorial District. As you can see from this map, the dotted yellow line shows the existing lot line with the black line shown. Those would be the new property boundaries as proposed. This particular lot line adjustment is associated with the Cuyama Solar Project, and this particular 307-acre parcel will be used to offset the 300-plus acres used for this solar project. They have also recorded an agricultural conservation easement on this project, and that recorded on October 22nd of this year. The project is under the Williamson Act, and upon approval of the lot line adjustment will remain under the Williamson Act. Currently, the larger parcel, which is 800-plus acres, is used for cattle grazing. The smaller 307-acre parcel is used for row crops and will continue to be used for row crops for the Bolt House farms. The project was found exempt under CEQA 15305A. It is consistent with all comprehensive plan policies, the Land Use and Development Code, as well as Chapter 21 of the subdivision requirements. Staff has one correction to the project description on the first page. On Lot 2, staff had indicated that the existing single-family dwelling was 5,666 square feet. In actuality, is 2,747 square feet. And that would conclude staff's presentation on this lot line adjustment.
Okay. Any questions by commissioners before I turn to the applicant? Seeing none, Ms. Perez, welcome.
Good morning.
Good
Thank you
morning.
very much, Commissioners. Laurel Perez with Suzanne Elledge Planning and Permitting Services, and with me today is our Associate Planner, Heidi Jones, and just walking into the room now is our property owner representative. Thank you. Thank you to staff for getting us here today, and we just have a very brief presentation. Thanks, Florence. And you can go ahead and skip to that second slide there. So this is the site location looking at an aerial photograph. It's about 3 miles south of Highway 166. And again, you saw this slide from, or not this slide, but something similar. This shows you in a little bit brighter color. Existing Lot 1, which is approximately 160 acres in size. It contains a pole barn structure, which we will be obtaining a land use permit for. And then Lot 2 is approximately 958 acres in size. It contains the residence that Florence just mentioned, as well as a garage and 2 accessory structures. The reconfigured lots it will exceed the 100-acre minimum parcel size, and proposed Lot 1 would be about 308 acres in size. Proposed Lot 2 would be about 811 acres in size. And this slide helps to demonstrate the ACE, the Agricultural Conservation Easement, that recorded last month in association with the Cuyama Solar Project. The dotted line there identifies the boundary of the ACE, which was approximately 333 acres in size. It is. It will be held in perpetuity as an ag conservation easement, assuring that this land area will be available for agricultural agricultural uses. And so you can see that the ACE encumbers the adjacent parcel, which is not part of the lot line adjustment. And I'm pleased to report that the Cuyama Solar Project is making its way through the permit process. We hope to pull grading and building permits later this year for the first phase of construction. And these are photographs of the property. You can see the mountains to the south, and as the land rises up, that would be the grazing land that is under Williamson Act, and of course the irrigated farmland in the foreground photos. And again, as Ms. Trotter pointed out, the project does comply with all findings for approval, and the Agricultural Preserve Advisory Committee reviewed the project and found it consistent with uniform rules and determined that the project still remains agriculturally viable. So with that, we would ask for your commission's support of staff's recommendation and approve the project. We're here and available for any questions you may have.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Perez, Commissioner Cooney?
I do have one. Good morning, Ms. Perez.
Good morning.
With regard to the agricultural conservation easement, what kinds of structures does it permit the landowner to construct? I understand about the agricultural uses, but
right.
Are there ag structures, for example, that could be constructed on the property?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Cooney, there are provisions to maintain the existing, in this case it's the pole barn that exists out there, and I believe that there is some provision for structures in conformance with the zoning, and in this case with the Williamson Act that also exists on the property. So any development on this property would be would have to conform to the county's uniform rules. In this case, no greater than a 2-acre development area encompassing non-agricultural development. The ACE also allows for the property owner to continue to maintain the existing agricultural roads and fencing and irrigation lines.
Okay, so there's nothing in the language of the easement itself that restricts the landowner from developing to the extent the Williamson Act allows. Is that right?
Chairman Brown, or Madam Chair, excuse me, Commissioner Cooney, that is correct. I do want to defer to Brad DeBranch. I can't recall.
Specifics of the actual ACE agreement.
Yeah. I don't think it does. I don't recall any restriction on that. Yeah.
Well, I'll assume not unless you let me know.
Okay, will do.
Thanks.
Laurel, who holds the easement?
It's held by a nonprofit, third-party nonprofit organization called Sequoia Riverlands Trust. We've been abbreviating it to SRT. So.
And where are they located?
I think they're located in Visalia, California.
Interesting. And they hold similar easements for other properties in the San Joaquin Valley. Is that what?
Madam Chair, that is correct.
Okay.
They have thousands of acres under conservation easement. I should also point out that the agricultural conservation easement was reviewed and approved by Planning and Development staff, as well as your Ag Commissioner's Office and County Council. And so there was quite the vetting of Sequoia Riverlands Trust to make sure that they were, legitimate and a trustworthy conservation entity.
Great. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And Mr. DeBranch, would you care to make any comments?
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Brad DeBranch. I work for Bolton House Properties in Bakersfield, California. I've made the trip over today. It's a good day. I just wanted to say that obviously we are in support of the lot line adjustment, and we hope that we have your guys' support.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, Ms. Florence, any comments? None?
Chair Brown, staff has no additional comments on the project.
Thank you. All right. So, to you, Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I personally see no reason not to give our approval to this proposed lot line adjustment. I think it's been well explained and ties together with the prior approval of the Cuyama Solar Farm. So I would move staff's recommendation for approval as set forth in our staff report dated October 15, 2015.
I'll second it.
Great. Thank you. So unless there's any other further comments, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, and there's your project. Thank you very much. Okay, so we will, agenda item number 3 will be on at 1 o'clock for those who may be watching this on TV, and Commissioner Blau will be remote at 1 o'clock. So it'll just be 3 of us down here, and he'll be remote. And that's it. So we'll see you at 1. So thank you.